The phone rang at 11:14 on a Thursday morning in April and she almost did not answer it because she was in the middle of something and the number was not saved in her contacts, and she had a policy about unknown numbers that she had developed over years of working in an office where unknown numbers were almost always someone trying to sell her something she did not need. But something made her answer it. She would think about that later, about the particular randomness of the decisions that change everything, about how the entire shape of what followed depended on a woman named Laura Haynes picking up her phone on a Thursday morning when she almost did not, when the fraction of a second between ignoring and answering was so small it barely existed, and yet in that fraction of a second the entire rest of her life was waiting, arranged differently than she had believed it to be arranged, patient and terrible and necessary. She answered. She said hello. And the voice on the other end of the phone said Laura? And she said yes, and the voice said this is Donna, and Laura placed the voice immediately because there was only one Donna who would call her from an unknown number in that particular tone, low and careful and weighted with something she could not yet name, and that was Donna Haynes, her husband's mother, who lived in Clearwater, Florida, and whom she had seen at Thanksgiving and Christmas every year for 9 years and whom she liked genuinely and without complication, which was not a thing most women could say about their mothers-in-law and which she had always considered one of the quiet gifts of her marriage. She said, Donna, hi, everything okay? And Donna said, oh Laura honey, and stopped. And in the stopping, in the particular quality of the silence that followed those two words, Laura Haynes felt the floor shift underneath her in a way she had felt once before in her life, standing in a hospital corridor at 23 being told something she had not been prepared to hear. And she gripped the kitchen counter with her free hand and said, Donna, what is it? And Donna said, I just wanted to call and say how sorry I am. I know this must be the hardest time. I know there are no words. But I want you to know that we are all here for you and we love you, and whatever you need we are going to be there. She stopped again. Laura stood in her kitchen in Cincinnati, Ohio at 11:14 on a Thursday morning in April, alive, holding her phone, and said, Donna, I'm sorry I don't. What are you talking about? And the silence that came from Donna's end this time was a different kind of silence entirely, the silence of a woman who has just understood that she has made a catastrophic error, that the ground she thought she was standing on has revealed itself to be something else, that the story she has been given and the reality she has just encountered are not the same story at all. Donna said, Laura. She said it very quietly. She said, are you? She stopped. She said, where are you right now? Laura said, I am in my kitchen. I am standing in my kitchen, Donna. What is happening? And Donna Haynes said 4 words that rearranged everything. She said, Michael told us you died. Kristin Haynes was 38 years old and had been married to Michael Haynes for 9 years and had loved him for 11 and had built with him, in the way that two people build a life together when they are both trying and both present, something that she had always considered solid. Not perfect, not without its difficulties and its seasons of distance and its arguments about money and whose turn it was to call the plumber, but solid in the way of something constructed carefully from good materials by people who intended it to last. She was a project manager for a mid-sized architecture firm in Cincinnati. He was a sales director for a pharmaceutical company that required him to travel 3 weeks out of every 4. Which was the thing about their marriage that had always been the most difficult and that she had always managed by developing a life that was full enough to not collapse in his absence, her work, her friendships, her sister Dana who lived 20 minutes away and came for dinner on Wednesdays, her running group on Saturday mornings, her garden which was her mother's garden's descendant in the way that gardens passed from woman to woman in families, the same plants propagated and replanted across generations until the garden is less a place than a lineage. She was not a woman who needed to be managed or handled or protected from the truth of things. She was precise and capable and had always responded to difficulty by moving toward it rather than away, which was something Michael had said he loved about her in the early years and which she now wondered, standing in her kitchen with the phone in her hand and Donna's 4 words rearranging themselves in her understanding, whether he had always meant. Psychologists who study deception in intimate relationships describe a phenomenon called reality substitution, where one partner in a relationship constructs an alternative version of reality for consumption by people outside the relationship, usually for reasons that have more to do with the deceiver's internal needs than with any practical goal the deception is meant to achieve. It is distinct from lying about a specific fact or event. It is the construction of an entire parallel narrative, A story in which the deceiver is the central character and the other partner has been assigned a role, often without their knowledge, that serves the deceiver's purposes. The most extreme version of this, and it is rare, genuinely rare, rare enough that most therapists will go an entire career without encountering it directly, is the fake death. When a person tells their family that their spouse has died, what they are doing is not simply lying. They are erasing. They are removing a person from the story entirely and rewriting the narrative as though that person had never existed or had ceased to exist, which is a form of psychological violence so complete and so fundamental that it has no good parallel in ordinary human experience. Laura did not know any of this standing in her kitchen. She only knew that her husband's mother had just told her that her husband had told his family she was dead. And that her husband was upstairs. In their house. Right now. Michael James Haynes was 42 years old and was, at the moment his mother was on the phone with his wife, sitting in the home office on the second floor of their house on Bramblewood Drive in Cincinnati, on a work call that Laura could hear as a low indistinct murmur through the ceiling. The particular rhythm of his work voice, the one he used with clients, confident and measured and slightly warmer than his regular voice in the way of someone who has learned to perform warmth professionally. She had always found that voice reassuring. She found it, in this moment, the most frightening sound she had ever heard, because it was the voice of a man who was conducting his ordinary Thursday with complete calm while somewhere in Florida his mother was on the phone with his supposedly dead wife. She stood in the kitchen and listened to the murmur of that voice through the ceiling and held her phone in both hands and kept Donna on the line and said in a voice she barely recognized as her own, "Donna, I need you to tell me everything. Everything he told you. From the beginning." And Donna, who was a practical and direct woman beneath the warmth, who had raised 3 sons and was not easily undone, said okay. She said Michael had called her 6 weeks ago. 6 weeks. Laura counted backward in her head. 6 weeks ago was the last week of February, a week Michael had been home, a week she could account for in specific detail, a week that had been entirely ordinary from her perspective, a Tuesday she remembered specifically because they had ordered Thai food and watched something on television and she had fallen asleep on the couch and he had put a blanket over her which she had found sweet enough to mention to her sister Dana the next day. 6 weeks ago, while she was ordering Thai food and falling asleep on the couch and he was putting a blanket over her, he had called his mother in Clearwater and told her that Laura had been diagnosed with a brain aneurysm and had died suddenly. He had said the funeral had been small and private, per Laura's wishes. He had said he was devastated. He had said he needed time before he could talk to anyone about it. He had asked his family to give him space. And his family, because they loved him and trusted him and had no reason not to, had given him space. For 6 weeks. Until Donna, unable to contain her sympathy any longer, had called the number she still had for her daughter-in-law to leave a voicemail of condolence and Laura had answered. She asked Donna to stay on the phone. She was not sure why she asked this, whether it was because she needed a witness or because she did not trust herself to do what she was about to do without someone present in some form or because Donna's voice, steady and low and full of a horrified love that Laura could hear clearly even through the phone, was the only thing in that moment that felt real. She walked through the kitchen to the bottom of the stairs. She stood there for a moment listening to the murmur of his work call through the ceiling. Then she walked up the stairs slowly and stood outside the home office door and listened. He was talking about quarterly projections. His voice was easy and confident and entirely calm. She opened the door. He looked up. His face did the thing faces do when the person they belong to is confronted with something they have been managing behind a closed door and the door has opened. A fraction of a second of raw unguarded expression, something she had never seen on his face before and that she would spend a long time afterward trying to name, before the management reasserted itself and his face arranged itself into something more familiar and he held up a finger, the wait one moment gesture she had seen 1,000 times, and said into the phone, "I'm going to need to call you back," and ended the call and looked at her and said, "Hey," and she held up her own phone, Donna still on the line, and said, "Your mother is on the phone." She called to offer her condolences. "For my death." His face did the thing again. This time it lasted longer. The 6 weeks he had been telling his family she was dead were 6 weeks she could now reconstruct with a precision that made her feel physically ill, because every moment of those 6 weeks was available to her in complete detail. The Thai food Tuesday, The Saturday morning run in early March when the cherry trees along the trail had just started to bloom. The Sunday she had made soup from scratch because it was raining and she had wanted to. The ordinary profound accumulation of a shared life continuing in total ignorance of the story being told about it somewhere else. She had noticed nothing. This was the thing she returned to compulsively in the days that followed, turning it over and examining it from every angle the way you examine something you cannot believe is what it appears to be. She had noticed nothing because there had been nothing to notice, which meant either that she had been catastrophically unobservant or that he was extraordinarily good at this. And she was not catastrophically unobservant. She knew that about herself with certainty, which left only the second option and what the second option implied about the man she had been married to for 9 years and what else she might not know about him and how long it had been not known. He did not deny it. She had expected denial, had braced for it on the stairs, had prepared herself for the particular exhausting theater of a person caught in something enormous insisting that what she knew to be true was not true, but he did not deny it. He sat in his office chair and she stood in the doorway and Donna was still on the phone and he looked at his hands for a moment and then looked at her and said, "I was going to tell you." She said, "Tell me what exactly, Michael?" He said, "I was going to tell you that I had asked for a divorce. That I had told my family something I shouldn't have and that I was going to fix it." She said, "You told your family I was dead." He said, "I know." She said, "Your mother just called to tell me how sorry she was." He said, "I know." She said, "I answered the phone in my kitchen. Alive." He said, "I know, Laura. I know." She stood in the doorway and looked at him, this man she had known for 11 years, whose work call she could have described from memory, whose coffee order she knew, whose breathing she recognized in the dark, and she tried to find in his face something that explained what he had done and found instead only the face of someone who had done something so far outside the boundaries of what she had understood him to be capable of that his face now looked unfamiliar to her in a way that had nothing to do with his features and everything to do with the fact that the person she had thought lived behind those features was apparently not the person who actually did. She said, "Why?" He said, "I didn't know how to tell you I wanted out." She said, "So you killed me." He said, "I know how it sounds." She said, "Michael, I am standing here. I am alive. Your mother just called to console me about my own death. How does that sound to you right now?" He did not answer. She took the phone off mute and said, "Donna, I'm going to call you back," and Donna said, "Okay, honey," and the call ended and the room was quiet. She did not scream. She did not throw anything. She did not do any of the things that the situation perhaps invited because she was not, by nature, a person who expressed devastation through volume or destruction. She was a person who went quiet and precise when things were at their worst, who became very still and very focused in the way of someone whose nervous system responds to crisis by narrowing rather than expanding, by concentrating rather than dispersing. She walked out of the home office. She went to the bedroom. She took the overnight bag from the top shelf of the closet, the same bag she used for work trips and long weekends at her sister's, and she packed it methodically. 3 days of clothes, her medication, her charger, her laptop, the folder of documents she kept in the nightstand that contained her passport and her social security card and the deed to the house that had both their names on it. She zipped the bag. She picked it up. She walked back to the home office doorway where he was still sitting in the same position, hands in his lap, and she said, "I am going to Dana's. I am not coming back until I understand what is happening. Do not call me." She said it without anger, not because she was not angry. She was angry in a way that was so large and so clean it had gone past the point where it needed to be performed, but because anger was not the thing she needed in this moment. She needed to think. She needed to be somewhere that was not this house with this man in it. She needed her sister. She picked up her car keys. She left. Dana Kowalski was 35 years old and was the kind of sister who answered the door without asking questions and made tea and sat down and listened and did not say anything until she was sure her sister was finished and then said only what was necessary, which in this case was, "Laura, I need you to call a lawyer today." "Not tomorrow. Today." Laura said, "I know." Dana said, "Do you want me to call her for you?" and Laura said no. She sat at Dana's kitchen table with her hands around the mug of tea and looked out the window at Dana's backyard where 2 small children were doing something complicated with a garden hose in the afternoon light and felt the strangeness of it. The absolute normalcy of the world continuing to be normal while inside her something was being taken apart and she did not yet know what it was going to look like when it was put back together, or whether it was going to be put back together at all, or whether it was simply going to be something different, something she did not have a name for yet because it had not finished becoming whatever it was going to be. She called the lawyer. Her name was Patricia Owens and she had been recommended by a colleague, and she listened to the story with a calm that Laura found both reassuring and slightly unnerving. The calm of someone who has heard many alarming things and has learned that alarm is not a useful professional response to them. Patricia said several things that Laura wrote down in the Notes app on her phone. She said do not leave the house permanently without legal advice. She said document everything. She said come to my office tomorrow morning. She said one more thing before she hung up, something she prefaced by saying I am not asking this to be intrusive but because it is relevant. She said how long do you think this has actually been going on? Laura sat with that question for a long time. She thought about 6 weeks. She thought about whether 6 weeks was where it started or where it became impossible to maintain. She thought about the things she had not noticed. She said I don't know yet. Patricia said find out. Donna Haynes drove from Clearwater, Florida to Cincinnati, Ohio 3 days after the phone call. She did not ask permission. She called Laura the evening of the call and said I am coming, and Laura said Donna you don't have to, and Donna said I am coming Laura, and that was the end of the conversation. She arrived on a Sunday morning in a rented car with a casserole dish wrapped in a towel on the passenger seat, which she carried to Dana's front door along with herself, 64 years old, 5 feet 3 inches, with Michael's jaw and none of his capacity for deception. And she sat at Dana's kitchen table and looked at Laura across it and said I owe you an apology, and Laura said Donna you have nothing to apologize for, and Donna said I am going to apologize anyway. She said, I raised that boy. Whatever he is, I had a hand in making him, and I am sorry for what he has done to you, and I want you to know that what he has done is not something I will excuse or minimize or pretend is less than what it is. She paused. She said I also want you to know that I am not here as his mother. I am here as someone who has known you for 9 years and who considers you family regardless of what happens next. Laura looked at this woman across the table and felt something loosen in her chest that had been very tight since Thursday morning. She said thank you Donna. Donna said eat something. She had brought enough food for a week. This was how she loved people, Laura had always known, through the practical and the material, through the casserole and the presents and the showing up unrequested. And she let herself be loved that way, which was itself a thing she was learning, the allowing of it, the not deflecting it, the sitting with the discomfort of being taken care of by someone who had every reason not to and was choosing to anyway. Donna stayed for 4 days. On the last evening she and Laura sat on Dana's back porch in the April dark with glasses of wine, and Donna said something that Laura wrote down later because she did not want to lose it. She said, you know what I think the hardest thing is going to be? Not the anger, not the practical things, though those are going to be hard. I think the hardest thing is going to be the loss of the story you thought you were living. Because you had a story, 9 years of it, a good one you were inside completely, and now that story is gone, and not because it ended naturally but because someone rewrote it without telling you. And you are going to have to grieve the story even while you are angry about what happened to it. That is a lot to do at the same time. Laura sat with that on the back porch in the dark and thought it was the most accurate description of what she was feeling that anyone had offered her, and said how do you know that, and Donna said because it happened to me once. A long time ago. Different circumstances. Same feeling. Laura said I didn't know that, and Donna said no. She said there are things about all of us that the people who know us don't know. Then she said, the difference is that I found out and I am still here and I am okay, and you are going to be okay too. Not today, but eventually. Laura said how long did it take you, and Donna said longer than I expected and shorter than I feared. She picked up her wine glass. Laura picked up hers. They sat in the dark together and did not say anything else for a while, and the quiet was the comfortable kind, the kind that does not need to be filled. Patricia Owens was a family law attorney who had been practicing for 22 years and who had seen most of what human beings were capable of doing to each other within the institution of marriage. And she told Laura in their second meeting that what Michael had done, specifically the fake death, the false report to family members, the construction of an entirely parallel narrative, while not a crime in the traditional sense, had significant legal implications for the divorce proceedings. She explained that in Ohio, as in most states, marital misconduct including deception of a significant and documented nature can be considered by the court in the division of assets, particularly when that deception has caused demonstrable harm to the other party. She also said that the emails Laura had found, which she had forwarded to herself before Michael had the opportunity to delete them, acting on an instinct she was grateful for, constituted documentation of the 18-month relationship with Kristin and of the premeditated nature of the fake death narrative, and that this documentation was relevant. She said the case was going to be straightforward. She said straightforward did not mean easy. It meant that the facts were clear and the documentation was solid and that the outcome was likely to reflect that clarity. She said Laura should be prepared for Michael to minimize what he had done, to frame it as a momentary lapse in judgment, a panicked decision made under emotional stress, something that had gotten out of hand and that he had been intending to correct. She was right. In the one mediation session they attempted before it became clear that mediation was not going to work, Michael said exactly these things, that he had panicked, that he had made a terrible decision, that he had been trying to find a way out of a situation he had not known how to face directly. He said he was sorry. He said it looking at Laura with an expression she recognized from 9 years of knowing his face and that she now understood was not sincerity but the performance of sincerity, which looks identical from the outside and which she had never previously had reason to tell apart because she had never previously needed to. Psychologists who study what is called pathological conflict avoidance, a pattern where a person will go to extraordinary lengths to avoid a direct confrontation they find intolerable, describe it as existing on a spectrum that ranges from ordinary discomfort with conflict at one end to, at the extreme end, behaviors that most people would consider delusional or sociopathic. The fake death is, in the clinical literature, one of the most extreme expressions of conflict avoidance on record, because it requires the person to construct and maintain an alternative reality rather than face a conversation they find uncomfortable. It does not mean the person is evil in any cartoonish sense. It means they have a fundamental incapacity for direct honesty in situations of high emotional stakes, combined with a willingness to use the people they love as material for their own psychological management. This does not make what they do acceptable. It makes it comprehensible, which is different and in some ways harder, because comprehensible things cannot simply be condemned and set aside, they have to be understood and carried and eventually integrated into a picture of the world that accounts for them. And that is harder work than condemnation and takes longer and has no clean ending point that announces itself. She did not contact Kristin. This was a decision she made deliberately and held to even on the days when she was angry enough to want to, because she understood that Kristin was not the primary story here and that making her the primary story would be a way of directing the anger somewhere more manageable and less frightening than where it actually belonged, which was at the man who had told his family his wife was dead rather than have a conversation. She did find out something about Kristin, however, from a source she had not anticipated. Kristin contacted her. A letter, sent to the house on Bramblewood Drive and forwarded by her lawyer, handwritten on plain white paper in small careful script, that said the following: I did not know he was married for the first 8 months. When I found out I ended it. He told me the marriage had been over for years and that his wife was aware of the situation and that the divorce was nearly finalized. 2 months later he told me his wife had died. I believed him because I had no reason not to. I am sorry for my part in this. I think you should know that he told me the same things he presumably told you, that he was devoted, that he was honest, that he was the kind of man who faced things directly. I believed that too. For what it is worth, I don't anymore. Laura read the letter 3 times. She thought about Kristin sitting down to write it, the decision it had required, the particular courage of reaching toward a person you have inadvertently wronged and saying I am sorry, knowing there is no guarantee of how the apology will be received. She put the letter in the folder with the other documents. She did not respond. She did not need to. But she did not throw it away either, which was its own kind of answer. The divorce was finalized 8 months after the phone call. The house on Bramblewood Drive was sold and the proceeds divided. Laura received the larger portion. She found an apartment in the Oakley neighborhood of Cincinnati, the 3rd floor of a building with large windows and a small balcony where she immediately put 2 planters and started growing herbs and 1 tomato plant that did better than she expected for a balcony, and she moved her things into it on a Saturday in December with Dana and 2 friends who brought pizza and filled the apartment with the particular loud warmth of people who love you helping you begin something new. Michael moved to Portland, Oregon. She did not know this because she was tracking him. She knew it because Donna told her, in one of the phone calls that had continued, quietly, without announcement, simply continued, because Donna had meant what she said about considering Laura family regardless of what happened next. Donna said he moved to Portland and Laura said okay, and Donna said I don't know what to do with him, Laura, and Laura said Donna, you don't have to do anything with him. He is your son. That is enough. You are allowed to just love him. Donna was quiet for a moment and then said you are a better person than most, and Laura said I have had a lot of practice lately, and Donna laughed, the first time Laura had heard her laugh since April, and Laura laughed too, and it felt like something moving again after being still for a long time. She drove past the house on Bramblewood Drive once after the sale closed, on an evening in January when the light was already gone by 5 and the houses on the street had their windows lit from inside in the way that winter houses do, each one looking like a small complete world from the outside. She did not stop. She drove slowly past and looked at the house. The new owners had already changed the porch light to something different, a detail she noticed and found oddly appropriate, the small immediate evidence of one story ending and another beginning in the same space, and she felt something she had not expected to feel, which was not grief and not anger but something closer to gratitude. A word she had not thought she would apply to any part of the last 8 months for a very long time. She was grateful for Donna calling. She had thought about this often in the months since April, about the alternative, about the world in which Donna had waited another week or another month to call, or had sent a card instead, or had decided that space meant silence and had not reached out at all, and in that alternative world Laura would have continued living in a story she did not know was a fiction for longer than she had, would have continued being someone's dead wife in a parallel narrative without her knowledge or consent, and would never have known, which was a form of harm that did not announce itself but was harm nonetheless, the slow underground kind that does damage before it surfaces. She was grateful for Patricia Owens and her calm and her 22 years of seeing what people were capable of and not being surprised by it. She was grateful for Dana's kitchen table and the children with the garden hose and the tea that was always already made. She was grateful, in a way she had not expected to be and that surprised her every time she felt it, for Kristin's letter, for the evidence it contained that she had not been uniquely deceived, that the deception had not been targeted at her specifically but had been a pattern, his pattern, the way he moved through the world, which made it less about her and more about him, and was a reframing that had taken months to fully absorb but that had helped when it did. She parked the car 2 blocks from Bramblewood Drive and sat for a moment in the January dark and thought about the phone call in April. 11:14 on a Thursday morning. She had almost not answered. A fraction of a second between two versions of her life. The one where she answered and found out, and the one where she didn't and didn't. She thought about that fraction of a second and what it contained, and how arbitrary it was that she had landed on the right side of it, and how much had depended on nothing more than the particular impulse of a particular moment that could have gone either way and didn't. She thought about Donna's voice saying "Laura honey," and she thought about what it had cost Donna to make that call, not knowing what she would find, not knowing whether the number still worked, not knowing that the woman she was calling was in her kitchen alive and that the call was going to change everything. And she thought that it was one of the braver things she had witnessed, that ordinary not knowing courage of reaching toward someone simply because you love them and deciding that love is reason enough. She started the car. She drove to her apartment in Oakley. She went up to the 3rd floor. She opened the door and the apartment was quiet and warm and entirely hers, and the tomato plant on the balcony was doing something she had not expected in January. It had put out one small determined flower, pale yellow and slightly incongruous in the winter cold, impossibly committed to its own small insistence on continuing. She stood at the balcony door and looked at it for a long time. Then she went inside and made dinner and ate it at her own table in her own apartment in her own life, and did not think about Bramblewood Drive again that night. She was 38 years old and she was beginning, and that was enough. That was, in fact, more than enough. That was everything. Laura Haynes is 39 years old now. She still lives in the Oakley apartment. The tomato plant survived the winter against all reasonable expectation and produced 6 tomatoes in the spring that she ate with salt and considered a personal victory. She and Donna talk every few weeks. Calls that are longer now than they were in the beginning, warmer, fuller, the calls of two people who have decided they are in each other's lives because they choose to be and not because anyone requires it of them. Dana comes for dinner on Wednesdays. The running group still meets on Saturday mornings. The balcony has 4 planters now. She went back to Patricia Owens's office 6 months after the divorce was finalized, not because she needed legal advice but because she wanted to say thank you in person, which Patricia said was not something clients typically did and which she appreciated more than she expected. She is seeing someone, has been for 3 months. A man named Patrick, who is a high school history teacher and who is direct and unambivalent in a way she finds both unfamiliar and deeply restful, like a room that is simply what it appears to be, no hollow walls, no closed doors, just the room. She has not told him the whole story yet. She will. She is not afraid of the telling. She is simply waiting until it feels like the right time, which she now knows is different from waiting because she is afraid, and that difference is the thing she is most proud of understanding. She thinks about the phone call sometimes, about Donna's voice saying "Laura honey," about the fraction of a second between answering and not, about how the entire rest of her life was waiting in that fraction of a second, arranged differently than she had believed, patient and terrible, and in the end, in the long complicated end, necessary. She is glad she answered. She would answer again. She will always answer.